Hi everybody, I'm Tom from Pro Writing Aid, and thank you for joining us for yet another session in the Ask a Book Doctor series. As ever, my guest for this evening is Sally OJ. How are you doing, Sally?
I'm doing great, and look, we've got daylight. How about that?
I know, it makes such a difference, doesn't it? It really does.
Spring is in the air.
It may still be freezing temperatures outside, but we do at least have
Yes,
daylight.
snow yesterday in Brighton. Good grief.
Yeah, isn't it just crazy?
Mm.
Sal, tonight we are talking, the hot topic is beginnings and endings. So I'm going to start off with a simple question. How important is it to get the beginning of your book right?
It's obviously absolutely vital. And when we were talking about it the other day, I said, I picked on you and I said, why is it important, Tom? And you gave the really obvious answer, which is, you want to draw people in, you want people to be engrossed. All that is, of course, absolutely true. But in the cold, hard world in which we live, vitally important that you get the beginning of your book right, because that's what agents are going to see and make their decisions on. So you have got to get your first 3 chapters, certainly, because that's usually what agents ask to see, right. But specifically, you've got to get your first chapter right, and even more specifically, you've got to get your first page right, because it's not unknown for agents to stop reading at the first page. So you've really got to put everything you can into the beginning of your book. I mean, obviously, I'm not suggesting you then let the rest of it out, whatever, but it's so important to get the beginning of your book right. And there is a thing that many people here, I'm sure, will have heard of, called the rule of 3. Everyone heard of the rule of 3? Anyone heard of the rule of 3? Which basically is your first line, your first page, and your first chapter, and then sort of so on for the next 3 chapters. So for the first 3 chapters, so then the first line of the second chapter, the first line of the third chapter as well. And those that's a very good guideline. The only trouble with the rule of 3 is that it can make people sweat and write not very naturally. Right. So the first thing is always get your first draft down, get your first version down, and then look to polishing. That's the thing to do, but polish you must until it's perfect.
Okay. And Sal, excuse me, when you sit down with a new client and you review a manuscript, how often do you find that actually the beginning is lacking something, is kind of it's not quite there? And what's your advice? How do you...
It happens a lot, even in very good books. It happens a lot that I'll start reading a novel and I never read the synopsis first. I don't want to be spoilt, by that. Yeah. And I'll start reading and my heart will sink and I think, oh no. And then once I'm a couple of chapters in, I'm absolutely loving it. And it's a great book.
Yeah.
I think people rely a lot on their experience as readers, where we all know that as readers, when we begin a book, if we're a bit confused or if we're a bit not grabbed, or if we're a bit, we think I'll give it, I'll give it a chance. It should all become clear. And 99% of the time it does. I mean, especially in a published book, that's a very good assumption to make. But you have to put the time. You've really got to put the time into getting the beginning of your book right, because it is a problem that I find comes up again and again, and it's usually not too difficult to fix. There's a simple set of sort of do's and don'ts.
Okay.
And I happen to have them with me, Tom.
Great, let's run through those.
I mean, this is just my version of them. I think you'll find the same kind of thing online. I don't think I'm going to tell anyone here anything they didn't know, but it's good to reiterate, because these are the things that are really important. And in a secondary way, obviously, you want the beginning of your book to be crisp, so you want some description, and you want good language, and you want to be showing, not telling, that kind of stuff. That's important. But there are some very basic things that you have to get right. The first thing is that you have to introduce your main characters or your main character. And you know, if you are a lot of crime writers do this. There's a crime writer called Elizabeth George, who I think never starts her book with her main characters. It's always the crime, it's always the setup. And she gets away with it. And with crime, you can get away with it. And I think if you're an established author, you can get away with starting a book with someone who's not going to be very important in the story. But really, as a first-time author, you want to begin with your protagonist, if you can. And again, I hate, in a way, going back to The Hobbit, but it's such a good hitting all the right notes of what we're going to talk about, because you know, you've got Bilbo, you see his ordinary life, you see his life as it is, and then the inciting, sorry, pardon my language, the inciting incident happens and Gandalf knocks on the door, and then it all kicks off. So I'll come to that in a minute. So first of all, introduce your main character or characters. Just a little bit of just let us know. We don't want it overloaded with detail. That's another pitfall that people fall into. Just let the reader know sort of subtly about their life, what's happening. Most importantly, what the reader needs to know is who they need to really understand who they should be investing their emotional energy in for the duration. Right. So don't lead them sort of down a false path. So right at the top of the story, we need to get a sense of the important people, the important relationships in the plot, or at least some of them. And we need a sense of connection with them so that we want to read on. So what you have to do in the first page, if possible, is make the reader intrigued. Oh, what's this? What's happening? Yeah. You know, what's in that letter she's reading? Why did they drop that box to the floor? What was in it? Or, you know, so something to make you want to turn the page. I mean, it doesn't have to be a thing, but to get the reader intrigued is quite important to sort of draw them to the inciting incident, which I will talk about in a minute. So help the reader to understand the character's motivation as soon as you can. And again, it's like everything that I always talk about. It's about caring for your reader. It's thinking of your reader. So many people, I've had this conversation with so many people, and they've said, oh, you know, everyone knows that you're going to be confused at the beginning of the book. Everyone knows that it's going to take a bit of time. And there is, as I just said, there is truth in this. But why not just give your reader a break? Why not just be kind to your reader and let them sort of enjoy the beginning of the book and not have to struggle?
Yeah, okay.
A second golden rule is, ideally, for the very beginning of the book, use action and dialogue for the most part. When I say action, I don't mean, you know, hand grenades and spears, though, if you like, but just, I mean, people doing things and talking, rather than a lot of introspection, a lot of inner world stuff right at the beginning of the book. You've really got to pull that off for it to work. Okay. So get your characters to talk to us, well, not to us, to each other, get them doing things. And be aware again that you're writing to a reader. So one of the things I tend to say is don't spend too much time sort of sitting around a kitchen table. And ever since I've said that, I've noticed how many books start with people sitting around kitchen tables, and it actually works really well. But it's just, what I'm saying is, you know, just you've got to pull people in. So to keep things sort of pacey and interesting, keep things tight and to the point. That's important. To try and avoid sort of lots of inner world kind of stuff. And again, you know, everyone here would be able to pull out, without even trying, 5 examples of very well-known books that start with, you know, somebody sitting alone and thinking. But ideally, you know, don't.
And like you say, you've got a bit more flexibility when you have an established readership, right?
Definitely. When you've got an established readership, you can more or less do what you like. But you'll find that a lot of readers will still prefer a sort of a traditional, is that the right word? I mean, I'm talking about Elizabeth George there. I'm sure loads of people here are familiar with her Inspector Linley series. I mean, they're fantastic books. I love her books, and it took me a long time to get used to this sort of false start almost. because what she does is she really introduces us to, you know, that it's not just it was 6 o'clock and the postman found a body. You know, we learn a lot about this postman and then we never see him again. So
Yeah.
it's very brave the way she does it, but she's such a fantastic writer. It works.
Well,
So
I was going to say, Sal, it's a good point to ask our listeners tonight, or today rather. You know, who are your favorite authors when it comes to beginnings? Who do you really enjoy? Yeah, the first page or two, because you know it's going to kind of grab you or be your kind of style. So put your answers in chat if you've got some thoughts on that.
So
yeah, go on, Sal.
Well, so you want your basic introduced to their world, and we want to see at least maybe a hint of there's a problem coming, a hint of something coming. Maybe, you know, the phone rings or mother calls up the stairs, or a sort of hint that things are about to change, and then you get your inciting incident. Now, some people don't introduce the inciting incident, you know, until sort of chapter 5, but that's very brave. Yeah. Everybody here, I imagine, knows what the inciting incident thing is. It's the thing that sets your story in motion, the moment that disrupts your character's ordinary life, the arrival of Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice, as I just said, Gandalf in The Hobbit, the lodgers in The Paying Guests, or the owl in Harry Potter. You know, these are the things that just sort of spark things off. Apologies to anyone who's thinking these are all, you know, I'm sure I could come up with much more exciting, but that's what your inciting incident. So once you've had your inciting incident, and still talking about your first chapter now, ideally you want, if not literally the start of the journey, and of course if you're writing a fantasy novel or a historical novel, there often is a literal journey, but what your inciting incident should do is cause your characters to react. So ideally in a way that's out of the ordinary for them. So they do set off on a quest, or they do realize there's more to life than living in a broom cupboard, or they do decide they don't want to be a bank manager anymore. So they embark on a sort of literal metaphorical journey, the thing that's going to change their life. And that's, you know, that's when the story should really it should kick in, and then it should keep kicking in. So the inciting incident causes a thing, which causes the next thing, and the next thing, and so on, all the way to the climax of the story, and then the denouement. So keep your readers curious, grab them from the first page, establish your voice and the voice of the book. That's quite important. And remember how important, you remember that you're selling your book on those first 3 chapters, and you are quite literally selling your book on these first 3 chapters. And I did, you know, I should have saved it. But one of the agents I follow on Twitter last week said, "Will I reject your book at the first page?" "Yes, I will." Really? She said. And she tweeted that. And I think part of it was to get a discussion going. But it happens, and it happens a lot. There's a fondly held belief that agents will, you know, give writers leeway, will think, oh, it's not very good yet, but I'll give it a chance. And, you know, all this stuff used to be true 10, 15, 20 years ago. You know, it was certainly true. Agents had all the time in the world. The industry was very stable. Everyone knew what was what, and they could take time to nurture new authors. It's very rare now. Of course, it does happen. Yeah. But mostly they're going to just, you know, do the agent equivalent of swipe right or left. I don't know which one it is, and look for the one they think is sexy. That's what they're going to do. So I just made that up. That's very good.
I like it. Yeah, you use the term, I think when we talked about this the other day, about, you know, seeing potential. So yeah, in the past they would have seen potential and nurtured you, like you say. I think that for me, you know, as a non-writer, that's really interesting though, the fact that you've kind of got 2 audiences to think about, your reader, but also, you know, your agent, because this is your lengthy elevator pitch, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah, if like we said, if your elevator was in James and the Giant Peach, but it is your set. It's your calling card. It's what you're selling.
Yeah, and we've had some great suggestions about authors who start well or who start with a bang. Neil Gaiman, Stephen
Neil
King.
Gaiman, absolute king of it.
Yeah, Stephen King, Graham Greene, which reminded me, I haven't read any Graham Greene for years, and I used to love his books. So that's a great point.
The thing is about Stephen King is he's another one who can get away. He doesn't very often start with the main protagonist, but
Right.
he can get away with. Everyone knows what's going on, and everyone knows, once you're established, once people know what's going on, you can play all kinds of fancy games. And I don't mean that disparagingly. I mean that, you can, and it'll work brilliantly.
Yeah.
It's not that you can't as a new author, but you've got to get it so right.
Yeah.
You just can't, there's no wriggle room. You've got to get it absolutely perfect if you're going to do that. So almost like give yourself a break.
Of course.
You've got the whole book to be clever in.
Someone, I think it's, who is it here? Jack has just mentioned in chat that, of course, the shop browser will also decide whether to purchase a book within 3 pages. So
definitely.
Really, really good point.
I mean, and the publisher, in between, you've got to convince the publisher.
Yes.
So it's really important.
Okay, fantastic. So questions are piling up.
I will say one, sorry,
yeah,
Tom, I will just say one more thing. If a book is published, it's gone through a process, and as a reader, we do trust. If we're holding a published book in our hand, even if, like, the one thing that comes to mind is Gormenghast. I mean, the beginning of that book is just brain mashing, but we trust, we think this book has been published, and it's going to come all right soon, and it does come all right soon. But that's the most, it's exactly the opposite of everything I've just said, the beginning of Gormenghast, and that's one of the most beloved books in the English language. So it's not that you can't do it, but you've really got to do it right. And I'm not sure they'd let him get away with it now. I think they'd cut out that whole first chapter now. I really do think they would. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Should we move to talking about endings? Because again, this is something that I feel quite passionate about, because I've read a few books recently where I kind of feel like I've invested so much emotional time being taken on that journey, only to be left kind of feeling a bit underwhelmed or frustrated actually by the ending not delivering what I was hoping for. And generally that's because it's been left almost for me to make my own conclusion. I know that may be me, but that's how I feel about them.
It's you, and it's me as well. It's one of my absolute, I absolutely hate it if the end of a book isn't tied up nicely for me. Some people love it, and really enjoy the ambiguity, but I always advise against it. And I have worked with people that I've had extremely full and frank discussions about the endings of some of their books, and sometimes I have prevailed and sometimes I haven't. And I mean, a book that I was talking to you about that I didn't work on is I'd love to know what people here thought about the end of The Miniaturist. Tell us what you think about the end of The Miniaturist, because I could have torn the book apart with my teeth when I got to the end of what had been a wonderful book up until the last few pages. I was outraged. I wanted to ring her up and ask what she thought she was doing. So, and that is, I think, I mean, it's a hugely successful book, so I may be in the minority, but I also know many people who were very angry at the end of it. And it's because it's kind of a mystery and you don't find out at the end what happens. And that to me is a crime. It's really outrageous. If you're leading somebody through a book and they're not quite being able to work it out and they're not quite sure what's happening, they won't mind, because they think I'm going to get to the end of the book and it's all going to be explained to me. So I will find out.
Yeah.
And if you get to the end of the book and it's not at least clear enough for you to make an educated guess, I think that's a very unwise thing. But there are readers who love ambiguity, and there's certainly authors who love ambiguity, You know, I work with an author who loves an ambiguous ending, and that's Sarah Waters. And again, I'd be quite interested to know what people here thought about the end of The Little Stranger, because for me, now I've just seen somebody saying only to find out a book had a sequel. I don't know why I sometimes see things coming up in chat. Mostly I don't. Now, you cannot, if you're writing, and that was, if it was a published book,
yeah,
that's really not good, because if you are writing a trilogy, I think we've talked about this before, each book must stand alone.
Yeah.
Each book has got to have its own arc, and you can't, I have this a lot with authors I work with, who I'll say, well, what happened to, you know, Susan? And they say, well, oh, it's all explained in the sequel. Well, that's not good enough. I need it explained now. You know, you have to have each book needs its own arc and its own sense of closure. And it's fine to leave the door open for another book.
Yeah.
But each book has to be standalone.
Yeah.
So that's a very important thing, is leaving a reader feeling satisfied, tying up all your loose ends. Yeah. The end of a book is pretty self-explanatory in a way. You want to tie up all your loose ends. You don't want to have any, especially if there's a mystery or something, you want at least the reader to feel that they understand what's happened and what's been going on. You need to answer any major questions that have been brought up, and you need a sense of closure, or rather your reader needs a sense of closure. And the worst things are ambiguous endings, which are left ambiguous endings because the author doesn't know what happens. And that really shows. And that there are, I can think of several published books where I know that's the case, but for me it really shows.
And is that generally because, or I don't know, what's your view, Sal? Is that because people haven't, when they've started writing, they haven't actually finished the story in there?
That's exactly right. That's exactly what it is. And it really, really, really shows. You know, I know there are different schools of thought on this, but I always urge people to know what the ending of the book is going to be. You can change it.
Yeah.
But start your book knowing what the ending is going to be. You can always, you might get halfway through and realize, God, they don't go to Germany after all, do they? That's fine. That's absolutely fine. But start with a sense of where you're going, because if you don't, the reader is going to feel that nebulousness, and it's going to bother them. Just to go back again to say, you know, the first of a trilogy, obviously you're going to leave things to be picked up in another book, but if you do that, you've got to be, they mustn't be things that scream out to be answered at the end of the book. It's you know, it's as I said last time, that's what being a writer is about. It's using your talent as a writer to make sure that people are going forward with, perhaps, you know, what happened to that mysterious woman in the green dress, you know, but it can't be the thing that they're left at the end of the book thinking, what the,
yes,
you know, what happened. So it's if you're, you know, ideally if you're writing a trilogy, you craft the trilogy, you know, you know the plot of the three. I mean, isn't it true that J.K. Rowling knew basically what happened all the way? She knew the whole story before.
So I've heard. I love this. There's a great suggestion from Jay Reed in chat saying, I created a spreadsheet with every possible ending permutation and whittled it down to the ones that A, made sense, and B, were more exciting. And it was 100%.
Fantastic. What you want is your reader to finish a book and go, that was fantastic. You know, I wish I could just start it all over again.
Yes.
I'm going to tell all my friends about this. That's what you want. If you think about how you feel when you finish a book.
Yeah.
And, you know, we were talking about ambiguous endings. It's interesting that there are plenty of, I'm sorry about the traffic noises, that there are plenty of ambiguous endings that people think they get, and that's fine.
Yes.
And the Little Stranger is a perfect example of that. Very few people I've ever talked to actually have understood what happens at the end of The Little Stranger, but nearly everyone I've talked to have thought they had. And that's fine. If you think you've got it and you feel satisfied and feel happy, It's absolutely fine. So I mean, I don't want to single Sarah out. Plenty of people do this, but if you're, for me as a reader as well as an editor, the Little Stranger did not tell. It led people all the way through the book saying something is funny, something funny is going on here, or is it?
Yeah.
And it didn't answer that question at the end. So for me, as Sarah well knows, that was problematic.
Yeah.
But apparently it's her book and she can do what she likes. Imagine my frustration.
That's answered Amelia's question, because she wanted to know why you weren't a big fan of the ending. We've got some great comments, but we've also got loads of questions piling up, so I think we need to probably
hit me with some questions
into some of those, if that's all right. So I'm going to kind of try and answer these in order, but there are 21 questions to go through at the moment, so we'll see how we go. So the first person, when you say first 3 chapters, how does that translate into pages for those who have long or short chapters?
100. To be honest, I'm pulling that more or less out of thin air.
Yeah.
But
probably a difficult one.
It is a difficult one, but not long chapters, not super short chapters. A sort of I think we all have an idea of how long a chapter is, and that long. I know that's not very helpful.
Okay. Well, and there's a couple of questions about this, Sal. So can you use a prologue as a way of starting without introducing your main character?
Absolutely. If it's clearly marked as a prologue, that works really well. People do it all the time, and that's a great way of doing it. And then you kick off your book proper. And I should have said that. I'm terrible. I'm a false editor. I make it all up as I go along.
This is why we go through the questions. Mary Lundholm, I may be misinterpreting your question, Mary. You said, what about starting with is it the ally, A-L-L-Y, and the situation? I'm not sure I fully understand that. So if I'm misinterpreting that, maybe you want to repose the question, Mary.
My guess is what Mary is asking is, can you start with an important character, but somebody who isn't the protagonist? Yes,
I see.
Can. That would be my guess. Again, it's just a case of if you do that, you've just got to do it really well, because if you start reading a book and it's about George, you subconsciously think, right, this book's about George. I'm reading a book about George. Here's George, and I'm investing in him as the character. And then 8 pages later, you meet Jeanette. And actually, then we keep meeting Jeanette and keep meeting Jeanette. And at the back of your head, you're thinking, but what about George? This book's about George. Now, obviously, this isn't always going to happen. Obviously. So if you do start with somebody who isn't the main protagonist, or somebody, you can start with the antagonist often. That will work, the baddie.
Yeah.
But it's got to be one of the main characters. And if it's not the person who's carrying the story, you've somehow got to make that clear. And I know that's very easy to say and not that easy to do, but there are lots of ways of doing it. Because otherwise your reader, I'm repeating myself, will just simply think, oh, this is a book about this person. Okay. So unless it very quickly becomes clear that it isn't, very quickly.
Yeah, in fact, so it's kind of related. Someone says, I understand to start with your main character or characters and motivation, but is it okay to have other main characters that come into the story as we move through the scenes and other chapters?
Of course, naturally it is, but what you mustn't do in the first 3 chapters is pile up too many people.
Yeah. Sorry, can anyone hear my cat meowing around? Sorry about that.
You mustn't have too many characters piling up.
Right.
In the first 3 chapters, just don't. And then again, Gormenghast is the absolute anti example of that. But just make it easy for your reader. Just ease them in nice and gently. And especially what I find a lot is somebody will mention somebody on page 20, and they don't turn up again until page 185. Yeah. And I've forgotten all about them by then. Who's that? I don't know. I mean, unless you give them, we've talked about this before with characterization, unless you give them a scar or a beard or a hat or a nose, you know, something that we're going to think, oh, it's that bloke with the nose and the hat, you know, then, but really, of course, you can have more. I apologize because I think perhaps that's the way I explained it. Of course, you can have more than your protagonist in the first chapter. You can even have people who aren't going to be around for very long. But if you do that, I suggest, you know, even don't give them names if possible, because that tells us, you know, it's the maid, it's the doctor, it's the, you know, because if you, as soon as you've named a character, our brains go, oh, I've got to remember Dr. Faraday, you know, I've got to remember. So if you've got other important characters, that's fine, but keep them to a manageable level.
I love
it's like you know, you wouldn't want to shove somebody into a, you know, football stadium and say, here everyone is, you know, meet the gang. You know, you take them round to 1 or 2 or 3, 4 people at the time, and do it that way. Think of it like that. Think of it like a football stadium.
I do love your example, Sal, the one with the hat and the nose.
You know, the one with the hat and the nose.
So Daryl is a regular contributor and asks, how important is understanding genre tropes in how you set up the beginning?
That can be a huge thing, and I did touch on that slightly at the beginning. As always, certain genres have got certain ways, the tropes, certain ways of doing things. You know, fantasy, a very common genre, is obviously, you know, somebody living a happy life, everything's fine until suddenly, you know, their father is killed or dies, or the troops, you know, the soldiers run through the village, or, you know, there's, you know, that's really, really common. And it's all right to stick to the tropes of your genre. That's fine. It's just what I said before when we were talking about fantasy last time. You just have to breathe a bit of new air into it.
Okay.
Do you know what I've done? I haven't got my, you notice there's no tassels hanging from my glasses today. And I haven't got my reading glasses on, so I'm having trouble focusing. So I'm not drunk. I'm just trying to focus.
That's good, Sal. It stops you getting distracted. Laurie asks, do you have any advice if you can't introduce your main character until chapter 3? I introduce a secondary character at the beginning, but my main character is discovered in chapter 3. Is this okay to do?
I'm not going to say no. But you've got to somehow let us know. So, you know, what I picture then is, I mean, I'm sure this isn't what you've done or what you're going to do, but what I picture them is a, you know, a police room. We're looking for this person. You know, what's happened, what's going. So it's set up that the people that we're meeting aren't the main person somehow. So the first thing that came to my mind was a sort of something has happened, and so the police are searching, and so you can meet some secondary characters, but you kind of know that it's not that. Or, I mean, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know how you're doing it. It's a little bit risky, but I'm always urging people to take risks. So as much as I always say, don't, you know, give yourself an easy ride and give the reader an early ride. Of course, sometimes you've got to stretch yourself creatively, and that's really important. But the main thing is clarity. Clarity is so important. So you don't want anyone to be confused. So what you don't want is in chapter 3 or after chapter 3 going, oh. Now, sometimes going oh can be all right. Sometimes it's not oh, sometimes it's oh. And that's very good. So it's a case of using your skill as a writer to make it work. Without seeing the book and understanding what you're doing, it would be difficult to say. But by heck, give it a go.
Sal, sorry, meowing cat still. Letitia asks, and this is something about working with agents, so maybe we should cover in a separate session, but she asked, speaking of agents, are there any tips you have on reaching out to one or picking one to reach out to? Now, I think probably that's something for us to cover another time, maybe. The most obvious answer I'm going to give is
it's certainly in this country, it is really getting hold of a copy of the Artist and Writers Yearbook. That is really true. That is the way to do it. And you look for the kind of agents who suit your genre. I mean, Twitter, you know, people you've got to search. You've just got to search. Go for the agents who like your kind of book, and go on Twitter, you know, and follow agents, because every now and then they will say, my list is open. So
okay,
do that. But if you see an agent who says their list is open, make sure their list is something that you've written. Don't send them something,
yeah,
you know, completely different, because they might just love it. They won't, they'll just bin it.
okay. And there's a great hint from Jay Reed saying the Artists and Writers Yearbook is available in reference section of UK libraries. So
absolutely. I was just going to say, it's quite an expensive thing to buy. It's a useful thing to have, but because it changes every year, better go to your library and go through it.
Quite a few questions about the questions about writing multiple books or multiple parts or sequels. So I'm going to cover a couple of those now. I'm writing a book with 4 parts. Should I treat each part as a book with an opening and an ending?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It's really important. It's really important. It's true that if it gets published and it'll say, you know, book 1 of the Norseman Was Here trilogy, that your reader will know that there are going to be other books. But each book has got to have its own arc. It's really important. It's really important. Think of trilogies that you read. They could all be standalone books. It's really important.
But you could, so some people are asking about leaving minor storylines for a sequel. So
yeah, that I said that you can absolutely do that. But what you mustn't do, it mustn't be that at the end of the book you're going, but that minor storyline, it must be a minor storyline that then gets picked up. You know, as long as they feel that they've got as long as the reader feels they've got a satisfying ending, a conclusive ending, that is very important.
So Liz asks, how do you feel about not knowing the sex of the narrator? A book I'm going to read soon has this conundrum.
There's quite a few books like that, actually.
Oh,
I personally find it really frustrating, because I personally find that I'm not focusing on the story. I'm just trying to work out if it's a man or a woman, or indeed as you know, another option. So, but it's not an unpopular way to go. People do it, and I think if you're going to do something like that, something pretty showy, something pretty flashy like that, you have got to have a reason for doing it. If you're just doing it to be flashy, it's sort of a one-trick pony that gets tired quite soon. I mean, one of my favorite books of the last few years was Milkman, which is a bit of a Marmite book. I think people tend to love it or hate it. And throughout, she never mentions the city that they're in, or indeed the country that they're in. You know, she leaves an awful lot to be filled in by the reader, and I think the reader does basically fill it in. But you know, it's you can get away with stuff like that if you write very well and you write cleverly, and you make sure that your reader actually gets all they need.
Yeah.
But
my beautiful cat who wants to be let out. I think I might have to go and open the door in a second. Okay. So I don't seem to be whittling down this pile of questions at all. So it's probably a good point to say to anybody, you are welcome to send your questions in after the session this evening. You can contact us through our support channels at Pro Writing Aid, or you can find both Sally and I on Twitter. So do that if we don't get to your question tonight. So, Kirsten, if the main character and issue of the book is psychological, how far can you take a kind of self-talk?
At the beginning of the book?
Yeah.
Well, this is what I was talking about. It's not advised.
No.
You can certainly get away with it for a couple of paragraphs, without doubt. if you go over onto the next page, it's a bit dodgy. If you go further than that,
yeah,
it's a bit dodgy still. I mean, I don't want to put you off. This is what I'm saying. Write your first draft, get it all down there, get your first draft doing, and then have a look at the rule of three. Is my first line strong? Is my first page strong? Is my first chapter strong? Just for the moment, just get it all down as you picture it in your head, as you want it to come out, and then go back and look and make sure it's all okay.
yeah, okay. Okay, I missed a question early on, and it's my difficulty is that I'm writing different chapters from different viewpoints. I have two main characters, one protagonist, but a few chapters from the viewpoint of a third character. So the first three are from three viewpoints. The first chapter is the protagonist, though.
Risky.
Risky.
Again, it's not unusual.
Yeah.
I think if you're starting with your protagonist, give it a go, because you're going to have beta readers. You're going to have people who look at it. If they all tell you they were confused as heck, then it's not working.
Yeah.
So give it a go. I think if you're starting with your protagonist and it's then very clear that you've changed to somebody else, and then very clear that you've changed to somebody else again. But it's, again, you see, it's piling up a lot. You're back in the football stadium. It's like here, this is where, you know, this is the part of the stadium where this happens, and oh, but by the way, I'm going to take you to another part of the stadium now, and that's where this happens. You got that right? Now we're going to another part of the stadium. It's where this happens. So it's just, I mean, done well, it can work. I can think of several books where it's done like that. Yeah. And again, genre, you know, crime, it's a very common way of chopping around. Just make sure it works. Just really run it past your beta readers and make sure it works. And remember, beta readers are I'm talking about proper beta readers who possibly don't know you, because you know, your friends aren't going to give you an honest answer, really.
This might be one for our listeners to contribute to in chat, but Maureen asks, how do you demonstrate that a character has Mensa level intelligence?
Carefully.
Right.
Because what you don't want to do is start, you know, having them sitting there and, well, I mean, actually that would be a way, if they finish the cryptic crossword in 4 minutes, then you know what you're dealing with. But, you know, you mustn't shove too much. Don't shove too much. It's got to be subtly done. Don't shove too much. I mean, look at, you know, well, I can't remember now how Sherlock Holmes starts, but no one wants to be sort of beaten over the head with one fact after another about somebody. You know, again, if you meet somebody and they start telling you everything about themselves, you think they've got autism, and you back off a bit.
Yeah.
I hope nobody took offense at that. There's nothing wrong with at all with having autism. But what I'm saying is, if somebody, you know, there are sort of social norms, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so if somebody if you meet somebody and it just all comes pouring out, you back away. Well, it's kind of like that in a book. You drip feed this stuff through. By chapter 3 or chapter 4, it's going to be perfectly clear. Or you can have somebody, you know, be careful of exposition. Always be careful of exposition and information dumps. But you know, you can have somebody referencing it after a while. What you don't want somebody saying is, "Hi, George. You know, it's lovely to see you. How's that Mensa level intelligence going?" You know, that's you want to avoid that if you can.
Yeah. Okay. So I asked the beta reader about my multiple POVs, both heroic and villainous. He said he was able to follow due to proper handling of voice, and he said the characters all work well towards the plot. I'm reaching 150,000 word count, and I'm wondering if I should do a dual release, hero and villain, or if I should simply trim word fat. Any thoughts on that?
My first thought is you've got to cut.
Yeah.
You've got to cut. How you do it is entirely up to you. It's how the plot works. But if you've got that far and you're not even finished, you've dramatically got to cut. I'm sorry, I know that's harsh, but you really have.
Okay.
Think of your reader, think of your reader, think of your reader.
Yeah.
And when you finish doing that, think of your reader.
So we're going to have to rattle through these now, because as fast as we get through them, they're coming in faster. So any advice for two POVs? So chapter 1 is female, chapter 2 is male, because you actually have 2 beginnings and 2 inciting incidents.
That sounds good. That sounds really interesting. Go for it.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to pick some of these. Romance and other love stories tend to have 2, sometimes equal protagonists. Do you think starting with one, the man or the woman, is more helpful than the other in terms of...
What, you mean male or female? No, just start with one. Yeah, I mean, very often you'll have more than one protagonist. Just make sure that you, well, as a general rule, make sure you start with one of your protagonists. Yeah.
Okay. If writing subsequent books in a series, how much of the previous history needs to be given at the beginning of the sequel, as you maintain each book should stand on its own?
Well, that's for a prequel. You know, a lot of times it will be done in a prequel.
Yeah.
You just don't want to. You don't want a huge information dump in the actual novel. So again, I urge you to look at your favorite trilogy and see how they do it. You can, my favorite trilogies, they just let you work it out.
Yeah.
And you can, and because they're well written, you do work it out quickly enough.
My book is a family saga. Main characters are mother and daughter, but the daughter is the main in the first person, but doesn't get born until the end of the first part of the book. Is that okay?
Without seeing it, that's actually quite difficult. Instinctively, that's too late.
Yeah.
Instinctively, that's too late, but I would have to see how you've done it. I think then I would suggest starting certainly with some kind of initial chapter or prologue with the daughter's voice, and then going back in time, perhaps. But that's, you know, I have not seen the book, I don't know, but instinctively, that's much too late.
Yeah. Okay.
But please don't let me put you off, because you might have it really well worked out.
Okay. So another question. The main character needs to evolve and overcome a flaw. What techniques are there to not make them too unsympathetic to readers from the beginning?
It's all right if someone's it doesn't, what we want them to be is interesting, and what we want readers to, you know, lots of books have got protagonists who evolve over the story.
Yeah.
You know, you can give somebody a sense of humor, or you can give somebody a vulnerability, or you can give somebody, but mainly as long as we're interested, as long as we think, you know, I've just worked on a book where one of the main protagonists is an absolute bastard, but you keep reading because he's interesting.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think as long as the reader is invested one way or another, they might want to see him get a kick up the arse. Yeah. You know, that might be what they want to see. So as long as they're somehow invested. So I don't know what's happened to my language today.
Brilliant. I was going to say that. Another question for chat. I think we're only going to have time for a few more, but Helen asks, can you give examples of any books or authors with particularly great endings too, please? Ideally fantasy, myths and legends, etc. Now, if anyone has any ideas and would like to contribute in chat, please help Helen out with some ideas. Be useful.
I would go for Rebecca, which is none of those genres.
Okay.
That's got a great ending. It's got a fantastic ending. And now my mind has gone blank. So sorry, but I'm sure loads of people are going to be bringing stuff up in chat.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. Okay, let's have a look. I'd like more suggestions on endings. What makes a good ending? Maybe we need to do a whole session on just on endings.
Yeah, the trouble is that people have got very, I've got very strong feelings about how I like my books to end,
Right.
but other people don't have those strong feelings. So the important thing is to make your reader feel safe, that you've guided them properly through the story. They've invested in this story. They've trusted you. So don't break that trust at the end of the book. Tie up any loose ends, answer any questions, and what you, like I said, you want the reader to close your book and go, that was brilliant. So to do that, they need to have a sense of closure.
Yeah.
And I mean, we could try doing a session on, I'm not sure, well, we could try doing a session on ending your book, but I think a lot depends on much more than the beginning of a book. A lot to do with the ending of the book depends on personal taste.
Yeah,
it really does. So there are some basic rules which we really have covered here.
Yeah. Let's going to try and squeeze in a couple more, if that's okay. Amelia asks, this is quite an interesting one. I've been advised recently that every story needs a narrator, and my story is lacking because I don't use one. Does every story need one, either implicitly or explicitly?
Not in a, I wouldn't put it in that way. Every story needs a character who's carrying the story.
Right.
That's important. And that can sort of, there can be a sort of baton that's passed on, even if you do it really well, in a split narrative. But somebody must, without doubt, be carrying the story at all times, like the Olympic torch.
Yeah, okay. One of my books started with a description of something harrowing. The characters there were negligible, but it was about introducing the beastly nature of my character and a glimpse of the fantasy world and why humans hate them. It was a short scene and it scared the beta readers enough to stop reading, but some liked it. Should I rewrite?
Listen to your betas.
Okay.
Listen to your betas. I can't really judge. As I said earlier, fantasy very often starts away from the main protagonist.
Yeah.
But if your betas are going, then, and more than one, if 3 of your betas are not liking it, then I would consider changing it.
Okay. Right. Sal, I think we're going to have to draw it to a close there. It's been a great session. We have had a couple of suggestions in Q&A about whether we could do a session on synopses and also do a session on multi-viewpoint and how to balance structure. So things to think about for the continuation of the Book Doctor series, which would be great.
Well, maybe other people could send in other things they'd like to, why don't we ask now, what would you like to hear about? And then we can pick the ones that are most popular.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we have, I think we've got plans for the next 3 or 4, haven't we? But beyond that, so please do send in your suggestions for what topics you would like Sally to cover. It's all Sally, not me, because all I do is ask a few questions. But let us know how we can help. We've loved running the first 10 of these sessions and we'd love to carry on. So please do send us your ideas. Sally, I wanted to say a very big thank you, as ever. Really great talking to you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and again to everyone here, thank you so much for joining in. That's what makes these sessions. I'm sorry if I've been squinting and rolling my eyes a bit, but I don't need to see you to know that you're there.
Well, Sally, you won't have seen that we've had more than I can't get my sentences out tonight.
Are you sure you haven't had a drink, Tom?
More people than ever before joining us this evening. So
that's great.
To absolutely everybody from wherever you joined us from. We hope you got a lot out of today's session and have a great day wherever you are. And we look forward to seeing you again in a month's time. Thanks very much, everybody.
Bye.